Hello, my name is Keely Walker, and I'm here to talk to you about tracking students, the goods and the bads about it. I picked this topic because my mom is a teacher herself, and I've actually been around it. Of course, being in school my whole life, but being a teacher's child, I get to see what she does with her students and how effective they are. Okay, so to begin talking about tracking students, I first need to let you know what tracking really means. So it's basically just a system that takes a child from an early age and tests them for like a standardized test to see what level of learning they are. Now when they're young, it's like reading and if they can do simple math and stuff like that. Whereas when they develop and they get older, it transitions away from certain topics, and it's just mainly so with language and math as well. Now, to track students, that would mean you do have to test them early in the beginning, and a lot of schools don't implement that and may not transfer the credit, the type of learning that they do. And so it's very important if you want to make sure that your child is in a learning facility, that it's appropriate and correct. Now that would be and when they get older, it's a lot easier. It follows them all the way through. In high school, I took all AP classes or pre-AP if that's what they offered, but there are many of my friends that took like ACP and stuff like that, which was just basically a normal average learning pace. It means that they just did everything at the regular level that the school system in Georgia says that they should, whereas mine was a faster paced environment and the work was much harder, and it was a lot of like teachers saying stuff and we had to go do it ourselves. Now the way that you would track a student, it would be your standardized test scores, quizzes. A lot of schools do behavior, which I don't think is a very accurate thing to do with children, especially because there's a lot of misdiagnoses with like ADHD, but they're just children. They're not developed yet. So those would have to come later in life, whereas like you get to middle to high school. But it also goes with your proficiency levels. Like we're at the end of the year, this is the standard test of which it's supposed to be, and then your average of the student. And that helps teachers figure out whether or not their teaching styles and stuff that they do is effective. But just because you memorize something doesn't necessarily mean that you actually learned it, because a lot of high school is a memorization game. So when you get to college and you actually have to retain that information, things can be a lot more difficult. So advantages of tracking, if it's done properly, it's very effective. It definitely helps students learn information more than they would have if they weren't being tracked, because you're catering to their specific needs and their way that they learn, because some people are kinetic learners, where they like to do hands-on stuff, and some people are just rule-based, or they need a guideline for them. So in lower learning levels, it would be better for them because they do it at their own pace and they won't fall behind, which is important if you know how good of a learner that you are, because I work in a fast-paced environment. So if I was in a lower level, it would not be very beneficial to me, whereas if somebody was more slow paced and they were put in an environment where they have to learn things very quickly, it might make them it set them up for failure, and that's inaccurate and not fair. So it is very important how the school systems and things implement this stuff. You don't want to set up your students for failure, but you don't just want to get your numbers. You actually want to make sure that your students are learning and getting the appropriate information that they need. Disadvantage of this is that a lot of the time it encourages a systematic racism in a way, or more so segregation, because you have the lower socioeconomic students and African Americans or Latino Americans that are falling behind and getting just placed there, and then as they get older they never get reevaluated. And reevaluating is also very important when it comes to a student, because you have to make sure that some children do worse in elementary school but get better as they go to high school, or it gets the vice versa, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to cater to the specific child's needs, otherwise they won't be able to get success. Like I said about the reevaluation, that's very important, but also it comes down to the teachers. if a teacher has a lower level class, they might be less likely to hold them to a higher standard. And I can experience that because I had a teacher in high school who taught AP Stats, but he also taught just normal algebra. And a lot of the students in there did not like him and said that he was very hard, whereas I thought he was a very good teacher and very efficient because he liked us because we were his only AP class. So there are some teachers, when they do stuff like that, they tend to expect more and react differently to a higher level class than they would a lower level class, which is completely unfair. And that's not on the school system, that's on the teacher to just take notice and flip that around. So my thesis would be that tracking can be beneficial for students if the school systems were to properly evaluate and adjust the current implementations to encourage success for all students regardless of their background. And that would go back to what I was saying about how they kind of systematically segregate and how it's based on like socioeconomics and your race. I mean, because it comes down to where you live, really. One of these studies was done in California where Don Bush analyzed up to 1,200 students from 6 diverse schools in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they were all high schools. There was an equal proportion of each in the high, middle, and lower levels of the same gender, ethnic categories because you didn't want to have a differentiation of gender versus race. So it's easier to just keep the pairs the same, to take so many of this and so many of this, so you're getting it leveled across the playing field when you're doing your statistics. And they did not look at English or social studies because most of those are not tracked in a school system. What they found was the proportion of African Americans and Latino Americans was not in college prep was less than twice. I mean, it was more than twice of those than Asian Americans and whites in the same ability. So it's saying that most of the students who were in college level classes were more likely to be white or Asian American, and a lot of that can also go back on the basis of your parents, because it said that higher education parents will increase your ability for a student to be in a higher class in the school. There was another study done in Kenya where they took approximately 10,000 students, and the school system there is a lot different, whereas they just have like a general one class for a grade, and it can be very difficult because it can be one teacher to 60 plus maybe students of that, and it's the entire grade level, so it's very difficult. But they ran this program for 18 months, and then after it they took another study a year later. So and they were measuring if it would if their scores on standardized testings. So it was just really mainly not look at behavior or background or any of that stuff. It was just set strictly on your grade. The results in this was a 0.14 standard deviation higher than those in non-tracking schools. So when the results were adjusted to accommodate for the minor differences, it was a 0.18 standard deviation. So this says that the students in tracking schools versus non-tracking schools actually scored higher on most of their things, whereas the average student for this test would know, the ones higher than the average student would know 5.5 out of 10 words and be able to spell them correctly, whereas just a normal student at the mean standard deviation would only know 1, and then with math it would just go to single digit multiplications, which is very easy to accommodate to. So what do? Well, we have to get the systems to recognize what they're doing and how it is not completely fair for any student to come into the environment and not be given the same learning ability just because they differentiate in one course against another. So one thing that they could do is let students apply and enroll in their own classes based on their own abilities. I was always able to sign up for those classes. I wasn't forced to take them. I got to choose that. So if I wanted to do a lower class, I could have, but not every school system does something like that, and it would be unfair for someone who in middle school did good at everything, but once they get to high school they start not doing their best in math and then being forced to take a higher level math course, because then that's going to drop their grades and then their motivation goes with it. So it would be nice to enforce that rule to let students, of course, looking back at their grades and getting teacher recommendations would be very helpful. And like I was saying, that's not a lateral system. You don't have to have one specific type of class for every course. You can do high math class, medium level English class, and like a low level social studies, depending on what you need, because every class is different and is based on the amount of rigor that they take. And so that means that we need to continue getting studies about what the overall effects of everything would be, because it seems like there are good and there are bad, but it all depends on which way that you use it and how helpful you're trying to be with the students that you're getting. Many school systems like to just look at students as numbers, but when you look at actual teachers, they like to help their students in their own way. So if we can just encourage them to treat all their classes the same, rather than a higher level better and a lower level not, we would be able to get some accurate results and be able to help these students do what they need to do to succeed in life. Education in this time is very crucial to the development of children in their brains. So if we set them on the right track, they will not fall from it. And that is all. Thank you.